Hello and welcome to the Royal Economic Society's special session on diversity in teaching in economics. So diversity in economics teaching and learning. I do apologise for not knowing that we were live. So hello and welcome. I'm Denise Hawkes. I'm the chair for this session. I am currently the Royal Economic Society's chair of the Education and Training Committee and also a member of University of Greenwich, so I'm Professor of Education Economics and the current Head of Department of Economics and International Business. And it's a real pleasure to speak today, following on from the session last time, yesterday, on diversity in economics, because Greenwich is a very special place in which to teach economics. We have a very unique economics department that has diversity in both the student body and the staff body. And that makes it a very special place to teach and to learn economics, but also an opportunity for us to be able to share what that means in terms of the practice of moving on from the diversity metrics onto really an inclusive, talking about inclusion and belonging in the space of an academic economics environment. As a department, Greenwich has 70% of its students coming from the local population. And that local population is largely commuter students drawn from Southeast London and East London. And for those of us who are aware of this community, it has many of the dimensions and characteristics that are of interest to the Office of the Students, and also are rather lacking in economics as presented by the IFS report yesterday. And so it is a real pleasure to be able to share what that means to teach a diverse group of students, but also to work within a diverse staff body. As a department, we have 60% female professoriate, and on rejoining the department as the head of department, I was quite surprised to see that even in a diverse environment, structural inequality in higher education is very evident and something that we need to formally address and directly change. So today we'll present on some of the things that we've been doing in the department to correct or to challenge structural inequality in education and higher education. One piece we won't present is work on social mobility, on our outreach, which is undertaken by two colleagues not with us today, Edna Solomon and Josephina Madonna, who both engage with Discover Economics campaign. But what we will present for you today is some insights into what it means to manage the staffing in a diverse environment and make sure that it's truly inclusive. And those will be our first two speakers. And then our second two speakers will speak about what it means to look at our teaching and learning and really make sure that those are fit for purpose for a diverse student body. So without further ado, I'll hand over to our first speaker, Tesfa Mahari. Tesfa, you have 10 minutes to share what we're doing on the staff side. And then following on straight on from Tesfa, we will have Farida, who will speak about the second piece of staffing, and then I will take a round of Q&A. Thank you. Tesfa.
Thank you, Denise. Okay. Oh, okay. Have I shared it?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Denise, for that introduction. As Professor Denise Hawkes said, from the University of Greenwich, and what I will be presenting today will be primarily on the EDI context for staffing in academic economists. The context why we are framing it within the EDI context is to explore how an EDI informed leadership or to see our understanding on how we apply it in staffing, both as a core value in its own right, as well as a guide for management practice in addressing particular challenges. The points that we try to see here is if we are talking about diversity and at all levels, then the starting point would be measuring it. And once you discover there are challenges in diversity, then how can we correct it, or what corrective measures can you take so that you have equality of opportunity, And the third element, or the other dimension, that would be how can you put structures in place so that such challenges in diversity, therefore, they don't become entrenched and therefore they don't affect the future progression and the experience of staff members. The three questions which I will be briefly presenting, and I hope I will have opportunity to discuss more during the question and answer session, are to see our understanding of the EDI by raising at least three questions. Why do we need EDI to inform our leadership style as a core value? What is our understanding? What is EDI? And how does it inform the leadership practice in day-to-day process? To start with the first one, we are dealing, or we are mentioning EDI, or we are contextualizing it within EDI, is simply to acknowledge that economics does have a diversity problem. As we shall see later, although the doors may be open or increasingly are becoming open in the early stages, but there is a challenge as we go in mid and higher level progressions. And these are covered in studies, both by many studies, including the IFS study. Now, when we say our understanding of EDI, it is simply to take it more than a simple diversity take. We are not talking about how many people or what they look like, but in terms of the real impact of power and the way it's exercised, influence and the way it's exercised, and how people feel a sense of belongingness, a sense of inclusion in the process. In this, I'm sharing this particular photographs simply to indicate that sometimes even having a woman as a prime minister does not lead to addressing EDI issues in terms of inclusion. This is Margaret Thatcher, both the cabinet members that she has when she took power in 1979, and the last one is when she left. In both cases, you hardly see a single woman which has been nurtured to follow in her footsteps, and clearly, therefore, it indicates that it requires more than a simple, it requires a deliberate act, or it requires a deliberate action with a value and an outcome orientation from the leadership point of view. Another one is...
the slides are not moving on. Can you just check that you've shared them?
Oh.
I could see them, but they're not moving, yeah.
They are not moving, okay. Shall I unshare and share again?
Try. Sorry.
Oh, I thought we, okay. Can you see them now?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's better, thank you.
Okay, okay. So it hasn't moved at all, so do I go back? Okay.
No,
so,
just keep going, it's okay. Just keep going.
Okay. So what I try to show here is therefore is simply to indicate that we start from acknowledging that economics does have a diversity problem. The diversity problem is more pronounced, although it may not be in the early stages, but as people progress to mid-career and the higher side or the top end of our of the economics academic profession, then economics does have the problem of diversity. And this is supported by so many other studies, including the IFS study, which I have just highlighted there. This picture is simply to indicate that the challenge of addressing the diversity issue will require a deliberate intervention at the stage of power. And this picture, which you can see, indicates the two cabinet members, one of the long-standing prime minister and very powerful woman in the British politics was Margaret Thatcher, and the early one, the picture shows when she just assumed power in the at the end of the in late 70s, and the other one shows when she left. In both cases, she led a male-dominated scenario. In fact, one person commented saying, such women, there is a tendency where they see themselves as patriarchal women instead of promoting gender equality. So simply having, we need to see it more than a diversity take. Another one is simply to say, even having liberators, they may not be as liberal when they assume power, and therefore with that, it requires a value orientation and a deliberate action. And here I'm giving you two examples, one from Africa and one from Britain, two leaders who are not credited for being liberal and inclusive once they have assumed power. And therefore it's the exercise of power which would change. The last picture is just from a comment recently where when Prince Philip met John Major, his first comment was, is reported to be to say, well, has your party started now appointing outsiders? That is simply to indicate to John Major having a working class background or from Brixton, and all of a sudden now he's becoming a leader of the party, and therefore he is commenting. And John Major's understanding of that was that can only come from Prince Philip, from his sense of being an outsider as a refugee, although from every direction it may look he's a very powerful person. I'm indicating that simply to indicate that inclusiveness is, or sorry, exclusion or being an outsider is felt at all levels, and it will require a deliberate action to address it. So with that, the idea of equality and diversity is a solid value system where it comes from an authentic leadership model. This authentic leadership model would show that, one, you will have to have a value system which always believes in equality, inclusion, and with that always watchful with the diversity. Secondly, it also requires a sense of restlessness, where once you have power, you need results, and only such results, therefore, such leaders, therefore, EDI-informed leaders would keep on questioning themselves at every stage. And if there is lack of diversity, they keep on asking, and proactive measures until they achieve it, they will not rest. And only such things, therefore, would lead to tangible results in addressing the issue of diversity and inequality in any profession, and in this particular case. Therefore, it refers to a scenario where we take our own example, our own economics department or economics as a profession. Personally, personally, I joined the departments of economics. When I joined them, they used to be very male dominated. And nowadays, at least on the gender dimension, they are more, as in the introduction we had, there is more diverse in terms of gender. But in this, even on this level, the idea of diversity in terms of the other elements is not that much pronounced, or is not that much present at all levels, especially in the progression. So with this, our starting point is there are structural inequalities in higher education in economics, and they may not be deliberated simply because of lack of questioning. One example which we present here is, for example, if we see in academic economics, there is the research path and the teaching path. As you can see in this, the research path provides a long list, more opportunities for people to justify how they can progress. But if someone goes onto the teaching path, clearly there is only one element. For example, this is taken from an example in our own department. So once such things have developed, therefore, over a period of time, and they tend to become more and more accepted unless they get challenged. So with this, on the positive side here is that in the past 3 years in our department, we have seen a deliberate action, which one, it starts from acknowledging and framing it, that such problem does exist because there are structures in it which does not provide an acknowledgement, which don't keep the door open for everyone to progress, to justify their contribution and to get credited for it, and with that to progress. And the second element is to provide, to keep the doors open, and where there are people who are on the what we call the teaching graveyard, then you would, one, acknowledging that as a valuable contribution, and secondly, creating a bridge between the research and the teaching path, so that people can flow between those two pathways. Now, let's start from
1 minute, Tesfa.
Okay.
1 minute.
So okay. Yeah. The evidence that we see here clearly shows you that in the audit that we have done in our department, it shows that in terms of gender, more or less, the people tends to progress quite gently, but the people who stay for a long time in one rank, there is a clear challenge which we face both on ethnicity gap. Therefore, people who come from BME background have stayed longer, and therefore this has started to be questioned. So what actions do we take to address this? I think in addressing this, there is huge progression which has been achieved. Part of that was in the past 3 years. One is what we call the distributive leadership model, where people who have been stuck in a particular grade, they have been given opportunity to become deputy leaders, and with that to explore new ways of progressing. The second is bridging the pathways where people can be given an opportunity to restart their research opportunities. The Dragon's Den is one of the examples. The third is creating a sense of belongingness especially for postgraduate research assistants, where they would be included to set targets and mentored in the process. This has now also gone into including teaching fellows, where people who previously used to be hourly paid, now they have been shown a way of progressing into the permanent posts, and successful avenues have been opened. And the last one, a new innovation, is even to go into an outreach model where people who are teaching in further education, pre-PhDs, they also have been given opportunities to join to see a career progression in our teaching with a proper mentorship, rather than simply using them and exploiting that teaching which nobody else wants to do. With that, if we see, has such interventions therefore given us any chance of impact? The starting point here is to see whether our students would have enough role models who would reflect. If our students reflect the local population, then do our staff members also reflect this? The starting point is probably not. There is a deficit, where especially with BME and Black role models. But have we, through intervention, therefore, did we make any changes? Yes, there is a change, and this change has been achieved as a result of a deliberate process of advertising. The language which has been used in advertising, the network that has been going on in terms of where area we advertise, which people we bring in the process, how we interview them, and if they don't make it in the first interview, how we provide them a second opportunity. If they don't make it for lecturer, would they apply for teaching fellows? Through all this process, therefore, the department has managed to reduce the gap, and as a result of this, therefore, we have got more Black and BME members. On the gender gap, we are quite more successful on it, but there is a lot of progress, but there is some work to be done as well. I know I rushed it a bit. Within 10 minutes, I tried to say a lot of things, but I would be quite happy to cover the details in the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, Tesfa. Do you want to unshare the slides? And over to you, Farida.
Can everyone hear me now? I hope you guys can. Can anyone hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, so I am going to be speaking from an early career researcher's view of academic economics and what does an academic career look like to a potential future academic. So purely because of timing, I'm not going to share my screens, but I just wanted to share my journey with you guys. So originally, when I was pursuing my educational career in economics, it was not my intention to become an academic economist by all means, or even an economist. Instead, I wanted to become a financial advisor. I have no idea why. And I thought that economics would be a good degree to earn, as it would provide me with a better understanding of how the financial sector works, as well as show me what else is interconnected within the economy. Because before my degree, I was extremely naive and did not understand economics at all. And all I thought it was about was the circulation of money in the country and the focus of supply and demand to ensure that firms can thrive. Evidently, I found that this was not the case, and the financial route was definitely not for me. What being a student at the University of Greenwich has taught me was that there was a lot more to economics than what meets the eye, and the essence of economics lies within studying human behavior. Why this is not screamed about more, I genuinely do not know, but I really do think it will be an eye-opener to future prospective economists if they're aware of this a lot earlier, especially for myself. So by this, I mean, from a young age, I have always been a curious individual and have always had a lot of questions as to why there are certain things going on in the world and why we can't solve these problems. However, at the time, I was not aware that these were economic questions. Particularly, I had a lot of questions concerning educational inequality within the UK, but being my naive self, or not even being naive, just being made to feel as if these questions cannot be solved because there is an economist out there, or politician, that is aware of this and has created the best solution they possibly can, and therefore I should not even pursue this. It does not help that growing up in an economically deprived area where all of my authority figures around me would constantly say that this is just the way that it is, nothing can be done, and especially not by a girl with my socioeconomic background. Clearly they were wrong, and so was I. From doing my master's at the University of Greenwich also, I recognized that there was a lot of conventional economic theories that really do not work in the favor of everyone in this economy. Specifically, they only work in favor of the white British population, which would be fine if only our population was not as diverse as it is. So I started questioning how has that happened, and I recognize that it primarily comes down to the fact that we don't know where to look at to find these potential room for errors within these theories, and have therefore taken some of these theories as God's law and have not critiqued them enough. Likewise, we also have not focused on them through different viewpoints enough, and that is due to there not being sufficient representation within the academic realm that can express the communal viewpoints that can actively make a difference. And this is where I just had my eureka moment and decided that I'm going to become an academic economist where I can represent the thoughts that are commonly neglected to make an active difference to ensure that there's at least a playing field among us that is even. So to kickstart my career as an academic economist, I have become a graduate teaching demonstrator at the University of Greenwich. And whilst this doesn't have the most established of job descriptions, my main responsibility is to assist in teaching and improving the student experience within the Economics and International Business Department at the university. Personally, for me, this was the best way to start, as my interests lie within education economics, specifically how structural inequality influences the supply and demand of education. So therefore, I knew that for me to understand what was going on and the continuous issues that students are facing, which needs to be solved, I had to have a hands-on role within the education sector. Otherwise, again, I would be that person that comes up with ideas that really doesn't fall in line with what's going on in the world right now. So, for instance, in my short time at this role, I have identified that academic institutions as a whole really need to start thinking about supporting students from diverse backgrounds once they are studying here, instead of just focusing about improving our representation levels within economics. So it's great to get them through the door, but we need to start to understand how do we keep them in our doors, and then to ensure that they achieve their graduate level jobs or that they get the best economic outcomes possible. And I'll be doing this by speaking to my students, and I'm developing my understanding on what is the best practice for them. However, unfortunately, I've found that being an academic economist is not as easy as I originally thought when it comes to making an active change. I thought that being in an academic institution where I am genuinely surrounded by incredibly smart people, I would be able to establish solid proposals all the time and make a difference very quickly. Clearly, I'm just very silly to even think that. And it might be the case for other people, but it definitely is not for me. what potential academic economists like myself do not realize is that your job is not evenly split between teaching and research. You think that teaching will not take up too much of your time, but it really, really does. For me, it should not be too bad because it gives me the hands-on experience that I've been dying to have. However, it pretty much takes over everything that I've wanted to do. And I get swallowed up by the teaching side, and therefore my research is practically non-existent. Finding this balance is very hard, especially for early career researchers who have no experience in the research realm, just like myself, and therefore we generally have no idea on what to prioritize. Unless we have a mentor that genuinely believes in us and wants to invest the time in us, transitioning into an academic economist is very hard because we do not understand the processes behind developing noteworthy research. It takes time for people to recognize that we are only at the first few stages of our academic economist career, and you also need to keep proving yourself and justifying that you have solid economic ideas. I understand that happens to everyone, but when it comes to us early career researchers, it feels like we're doing it 100 times more. People are very quick to judge you on your ability because of the background that you come from. For myself, a lot of my ideas have initially been pushed to the side because I'm just a young girl. But when my ideas have been relayed by someone with more authority, then I see that people are rushing to hear me out. So how come my ideas are suddenly good now? Why are we still failing to recognize that just because someone speaks of something that may be a little different from your conventional norm, it does not mean that they don't deserve to be listened to? So I won't lie to you, I have had some reservations about becoming an academic economist. Sometimes it feels as if I'm not going to get anywhere and my career will just stagnate because I'm just going to end up becoming a teacher instead of actually making a difference as I wanted to and getting my voice heard. However, I do also recognize that I'm just being very, I don't even know the word at this point, I'm just being, let's say, naive, and it's just because I am young and I have plenty of time to develop. I also recognize that those that have been trying to squash my voice are a minority, and I'm very fortunate to be in a department that are willing to give the best advice when they can and happy to listen to me and bounce off their ideas with me so that we can develop our thoughts further. And I'm okay with this taking time because I know my ideas are noteworthy, thanks to the validation of my students and my colleagues. So being an academic economist is definitely for me, and I'm so glad that I started doing this at Greenwich University because I have the resources at my fingertips that can help me develop any of the economic questions that I didn't realize were economic questions when I was a child. But yeah, that was really rushed, sorry.
No, thank you, Farida, spot on. Farida, let me keep you on for a question because there's not any questions that have come through or that I can see on the system. So let me just ask you, because we've been lucky to receive one of the Royal Economic Society COVID grants, and you'll be working on a piece of research with that. And you're also working on a piece of research, I know, with a colleague at Sussex. So tell me what it means to have the opportunity to work on a piece of academic research around actually quantifying the impact of teaching in higher education.
Where do I begin? I think for me personally, the fact that I get to do it just gets to prove to so many people that this little girl from her background can finally make the difference in the higher education. Because when I was, like I said, when I was growing up, it's always, you can't do that because you are just this Asian British girl that comes from this area and you will not understand what it means for the general public. However, like I said, I can represent the public a little bit better as I've come from all these different types of communities. So for me to be able to quantify it finally makes me feel like I've done something worthy and people have finally recognized my abilities in making the difference I've been trying to do for the last however many years.
And in our working together, just to give that context, you see things in data that I don't, and that's always been a pleasure working together. What is it about working with someone when you can see a difference? What sort of things enable a voice? Can you share a little bit about that?
Sorry, let me just think. I think so, for instance, when we work together, you can bring your side of the story and I can bring mine too. So I would never understand your experiences, same as I would never understand Tesfa's or Doty's, because I'm just not you guys, it's just, you will not understand mine either. So what I like about it, working and finding these answers from the data, is that we're not just putting a number to something and just leaving it there. We're actually developing it and then understanding why these theories have been a bit flawed, and we can put something towards that and make sure, like I said earlier, that there is an even playing field for everyone, because at the moment I think we can agree that there isn't. So by me putting my voice forward for, let's just say, my Asian community, and you putting yours forward for your white British community, we are genuinely making a difference, because I don't think a lot of people are doing that so far. They just assume that this number, what's the right word? They assume that the numbers that we are finding works for the collective, whereas it doesn't, and we are, I can't find the word, sorry. We are breaking it down to show that they're not.
Or a population worth studying. Tessa,
Yeah.
let me ask you a question again, because there's not one on the system. We worked together on the equality audit. Do you want to tell people a little bit about what that equality audit led to? So you showed the numbers very briefly, but do you want to give a little bit of context about what it involved to actually do an EDI audit of the department?
The EDI audit consists of one, questioning into gathering information, detailed information about us, not only as we know each other, a colleague, but for the complex people that we are. In the process, therefore, when you discover a person's background, how long they have been around, what type of background would they share, and within that, which research pathway have they followed, and then you take a journey of each person. Of course, it's anonymized, the data that you would take, however small our department is, but you follow a journey of a particular person, and once you discover, therefore, a pattern emerges. Let's say, for example, if someone has stayed in a particular grade longer than others, then you try to get a meaning to that. Therefore, the meaning could therefore come, could it be therefore a maternity issue, where a person therefore has to interrupt for a joy that we all need in society, being a mother, foregoing that, therefore there is a penalty involved. So you question that. Therefore, one, you will have to bring that evidence. Therefore, is there therefore a female stalled career, or a career staying in a particular grade for a longer period of time for simply that purpose? Then you flag that up. The second element could also be, okay, is there any information on this, therefore, with other socioeconomic backgrounds, where could this person be therefore from a BME background? That could also be a journey which you would follow. When did they join us? What did they came with? And how far have they gone? And in the process, if you want to question it, therefore, to say, what networks do they associate in the process? Which research group do they belong to? And if you want to dig further as well, you would find, have they been invited, included, encouraged to do? The second element is, have they taken initiative? Have they been rewarded for a particular initiative? Or so with that, by following such and mapping it in the process, therefore, you will get a very proper data which informs you to say, okay, this person has done at least as equal as others on so many grounds, and therefore there must be certain structural issues why such things does happen. The next step that comes from this is therefore understanding those issues and try to understand it from what mitigating circumstance. Can we measure them? We can easily measure it, for example, where if someone stays on a particular grade for 10 years, while another person clears them every 2 years. That is clear, something which you can measure by time. If someone has been, for example, you can even see the workload damage, what type of work have these people been given? That also you can define it. So with this, it is such level of in-depth interrogation, and I will have to give you credit, Denise. It only took a person like you to come here to question it and to say, if someone has been here and then I left and I came back and that person is still here, what is it? Therefore, it only takes a person with that grounding of your value system, where you wouldn't accept a wrong and you wouldn't rest until it gets sorted, that we manage it to get such even understanding it. I'm sure some people will progress and others don't. And every person will take their own pace. But the fact that you put it on the agenda, you put it on a template, and with the view that this template or this pilot can also be replicated, to the faculty and beyond. I think it is a credit to you. I think it would be remiss of me if I don't acknowledge that.
Thanks, Tesfa. You gave a beautiful answer to one question without even knowing it came in. It's correct that the averages only tell us where to look. So someone's put a question around kind of aggregate averages. The averages tell us where to look, but it is qualitative and it is involving actually being a line manager to make a difference to the structural inequality that we see. So thank you for that, Tesfa. You've answered that question. Farida, there's quite a lot coming in terms of encouragement and positivity for you, which is lovely. But there is one question about, which we'll end with before we hand over to Macme. Knowing the challenges you faced, what advice would you give to someone who was following you in your footsteps? So we'll end with that one and then I'll hand over to Macme.
I think you should definitely understand the organisation that you're about to go into and understand what it is that they prioritise more, whether it's your research or whether it is your teaching. You should also, for myself, because I did go into an organisation where I studied for the last 4 years, so I did know how my lecturers worked, but I also didn't understand the extent of who is the best person that can help me move forward. So I just thought that they're all great, they're all very smart, they're going to help me do this, but I didn't realise that there's actually people that have different strengths. So before anyone actually gets there, you should find out who your support system is and who are the best people that can do that for you. So if you guys haven't realised, Elise is one of my mentors in my life in general. So she has always been helpful throughout my period now, and she would help me before I got there. So I'd recommend that to anyone before you become an academic economist, is to try and get a good support bubble before you begin to do it.
Thank you, Farida. Macme, your turn.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you to Tesfa, Denise, and Farida. Can everybody see my slides?
Yeah, we can see them.
Okay, all right. Hi everyone. Our paper would be slightly different. So it's a lot of number crunching and a lot of abbreviations that we use and so on. Now, the background to our work is that we try to increase inclusive curricula, and we got finance to do a pilot for this. And we use the team-based learning, which is a new pedagogy in hands-on empirical work that economists need to do. And we experimented that. And our intention was to look at one of our core undergraduate, third-year undergraduate course, and using a collaborative approach to learning, collaborative group work, in order to increase the student engagement and also close the gap between the different groups, different ethnicity and gender. And we give you some of the results. I'm afraid I have 30 slides. I've tried to condense it, but I thought if I don't, then it would, we lose the flavor. So I quickly go through it. Please stop me wherever you think that needs more explanation. So I've put 3 minutes for each slide. So we have to bam, 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 move on. So this is the background to sectoral attainment gap, which is a sort of national one. And the most interesting one, thank you to Gabriella for finding this information, is that percentage of first and upper second for white students as opposed to ethnic minority. So that is obviously something that we thought is unexplained issue that needs to be addressed as economists and as educators. So what we did was we looked at the pattern in our course, our level 5, which is intermediate. And we looked at the overall, which there was not any gap, but we do provide a lot of support to students through different techniques of feedback and assessment, like problem set and feed-forward feedback. And it seems that BAME students do better for exam, and they do badly for analytical piece of work. So this course that you're looking at, the blue one is looking at macroeconomics at level 5, which is a core subject that all the economists have to do. And is assessed by an essay for term 1 and patchwork test, for the term 2. And patchwork consists of a lot of analysis, doing posters and different type of activities, which requires a little bit of originality and analysis. And essay is straightforward. And we do the same, more or less the same for micro. These are 2 separate courses that we had. And the result was that overall there wasn't any gap, but naturally for different, as Denise mentioned earlier on, the average sometimes is not good. It might direct you in certain direction, but we need to investigate more. So there was a persistent negative gap. And this is the figure you can see is coursework and not resits. And exam also showed BAME gap as well. So when they do essays and then we have patchwork tests, so it seems there would be ethnic minorities tend to do less than the white students. And then we received funds for piloting a new pedagogy. It's called team-based learning. It's originally used for people who are learning in pharmaceutical or medicine, whereby students are required to not necessarily memorize information, but to be able to process a lot of information very quickly. So what we did was in 2017, 2018, we implemented that after receiving the training in July, in-house training in July 2017, we introduced that in our 3rd year course, undergraduate course. Term 1 was a standard delivery. We had 2 hours lecture and 1 hour tutorial. And in term 2, we had team-based learning. So what was our intention? Our intention was to offer students a better learning experience, reduce the attainment gap for BAME students, and improve a students' employability by giving them transferable skills. As an economist, because we do write references for students, employers want students to have transferable skills, whether in data analysis, in reading reports, interpreting tables, data, or anything of that nature. So what we did in term 1, half of the course was on macro, half of the course was micro, and they were assessed by simulation exercise, which we used the data set from Penn, and they did a time series, and that was 60% of their overall grade. Then we introduced team-based learning, which is a collaborative group work as opposed to cooperative group work, meaning that they need to work together. And we divided again. We dealt with topical issues like productivity puzzle, global competitiveness, globalization, and the rest. We for each topic, we used different econometric techniques. And then the students had, at the end of the term, an in-class open book sort of test, which consisted of individual and group activities. And that constitute for 40% of overall grade. Now, for those of you not familiar, I do appreciate this could be a little bit confusing if you're not familiar with TBL, but we are more than happy to share our slides with you. And we are just about publishing this paper as well in the Journal of Economic Education. So you would have access to it with more detail and more explanations. So TBL basically consists of 3 phases. Phase 1 is individual preparation. So students have 1 week to read the relevant material that we obviously release on Moodle. And then stage 2, which is the first hour of the class, they are involved in tests. So more is a multiple choice questions, 10 multiple questions that they do individually. Then they do the same set of multiple choice questions within the group. And then we would have discussion depending on the topic as well. So this is quite exciting. Almost 90% of the time, almost 100% of the time, sometimes, students do better when they collaborate within the team. So they get a higher grade. And in fact, I just finished marking the test that they took last week. And in fact, they all have done much better in the team rather than individually. But anyway, that's the purpose. That's how you learn. And the last 2 hours of the session, students have team application problems and exercises. So for instance, if they have issue about globalization, we give them an index and then we ask them to look at various reports and carry out certain econometrics activities. So before the TBL starts, if you look at the top row, then the students have group bonding exercise, and we send them to the escape room, which I'm going to show you the result of it in a minute. And then they have 2 peer-to-peer, peer-on-peer anonymous feedback. So they give the team members their views, and that would be at the beginning and at the end of term 2. So
may you just have a minute?
7.
You need to be a bit quick. 1 minute.
Okay,
not long.
so I probably go through the some of these issues later on if there are any questions. So this is the groups this is an important, very, very crucial part of the TBL, is the way the groups are formed. And this is formed by tutors, not by students. It's fixed and is not going to move. There are between 5 to 7 members of students, and they are heterogeneous based on gender, ethnicity, and their grade in level 5. The only problem is that sometimes you don't have equal number of male and female, but those are some of the issues that we needed to answer. So before they attend, they start looking at TBL, they go for a group bonding exercise. We've sent them to the escape room for them to work on, and that's the result. We definitely worked as a team, and it brought us together, which that's what we do. This is how we organize. In fact, these are our students, and you could see us somewhere there in there. So this is the first part when they do multiple choice questions, and this is when they do application exercise. We also, every fortnight, we ask them Mentimeter questions to see how they feel about the topic area, how they feel about the performances. They choose a name of famous economists. Some of them are Nobel Prize winners, and they use that name as a sort of anonymous name so that we would know each student's sort of performance or their feeling throughout the term. And generally, they feel much happier when we ask them these 3 questions about what they feel about the learning and also today's activities and your performance. And generally, they feel they've done better, or they feel much more in charge of their learning. For the peer-to-peer anonymous feedback, we use the online teammates, and we ask them 5 questions, 4 questions about them, the group, and 1 question about TBL. And this is some of the answers that they've given. And they have been extremely mature and extremely pleasant to one another, to the point that I think most of them should become politicians, but that's by and by. And that's the comment they make about the TBL, how they felt about it, how in charge they are, and so on. Since I'm running out of time, I'll just give you some of the results. Is that they have better performances with dramatic reduction in the standard deviation, and generally on the TBL, the ethnic minority and females do perform better, and the gap between BAME and the white students is closing with a shorter standard deviation. We've done some statistical analysis, and again is support. So that's some of the statistical work that we have done to show that we have a BAME effect, and what happens, whether we are sensitive to gender or whether to ethnicity and so on, and how students perform. And we did on the result estimation, And again, we can see that the students are performing better, especially the BAME students. I'm more than happy to explain all these tables, but just I'm rushing for you to see that we've done in-depth analysis so that we are fully convinced that TBL does address the issue of the difference between gender, ethnicity, and it really students mature through the process and they've become in charge of their learning rather than being a passive person in the classroom. And generally the average increases apart from one of the groups because of the composition of it, and the standard deviation goes down. And that's true for the 2019. So we have two cohorts, 2017-18 and 2018-19. So this is 2 years results. And generally, just to wrap up, we think that the teamwork is good and it does give inclusiveness, but also we need to be quite aware of our assessment with regard to formative, summative, and the type of feedback that we give to the students in order to reduce this sort of effect. We had the blogs for this.
Thank you, Macme. Thank you so much, Macme.
Sorry, I'm rushing.
No, it's okay. It's okay. We need to hand over to Adolte. But thank you for that, Macme.
Thank you.
Adolte, your turn. You need to unmute.
Okay, there we go. Okay, can you see my screen now?
We can, all good.
Okay, so okay, all right. So what I'm going to do is to tell you about an initiative to find out from within the faculty in the Department of Economics and International Business, the extent to which we make efforts to deliver courses that are diverse, both particularly in terms of the scholarship that is being taught by members of staff. So this is going to be done in two main parts. First part is to just give you an idea of the discussion that we had that led to us to do this. And then the second part will describe very briefly the questionnaire that has been designed, which has also been administered to members of staff to get them to do a sort of benchmarking exercise. And that's where we are now. And the next phase, which we are going to go down, is to obviously to look at the results and to get people to collectively evaluate what we put down, where we are, assess where we are as a group, and decide what we're going to do next. Okay, so what's the case for decolonizing economics learning and teaching? The thing that I would want to say is that the thing about empire is, in a sense, which is where all this is coming from, is that it creates very different kind of subjectivities. And I want to give 3 examples of that. The first is Australia Day. This is a date on the 26th of January where Australians celebrate the founding of Australia, except that the Aborigines in Australia call it Invasion Day, or Survival Day, or Day of Mourning. All right. So you got in Australia two particular groups who see an event from completely different perspectives. In the US, there's something called developed by a physician in 1851 called drapetomania. What is drapetomania? It is the mental illness that caused enslaved Africans to flee captivity. So this was considered a disease which needed to be cured. So you had 2 groups, the enslavers and the enslaved, with completely different perspectives on what was going on. In today's world, I'm going to give you a controversial definition. Who is a development partner and who is a donor? A development partner or development partners are countries that conquer other people, hold them in varying degrees of colonial subordination and exploitation for up to 400 years or more, and then confer independence or not, as the case may be. So if you're in development economics and you talk about partners, that's who you're talking about. But again, there's complete dissonance within the groups as to what is going on. So we are saying that there is a need to appraise the past and to get a sense of what has been going on. So we're arguing that the modern world we live in was built on the exploitation of African, Asian, Native American, and Australian peoples by Europeans. This is not an accusation, it's just, I think, a fact. And that the present global order, the economic, political, cultural, and geopolitical, is largely the product of this European-dominated imperialist past. That in order to understand the present global order, we need to recognize that it has moved from a force-based imperialist past to a rule-based one. And the rule-based one is what we live in today. And that the current rule-based system largely preserves the legacies that were established in the past. So we hear very often people talking about a rule-based international system. That is true, but the rules that were established at the time when the international rules were established were the rules that were established by the major powers in order to run the system that they had built effectively or efficiently and profitably for them. But these rules seek to shape the global economic, political policies and practices, meaning that these are the policies and practices that those previously subordinated by empire and colonialism are trying to use as they strive to catch up. So the system has been created, rules have been established, and these rules are primarily to control the behavior of those who have been previously subordinated, who are trying to catch up with those that put the rules on them. But that these rules delegitimize the voices of the global majority, stymie their aspirations, and impede their progress in terms of catching up. So that's looking at the past and the present. And then we look at systems of knowledge production and summarize, perhaps controversially, but what we do, that European knowledge production systems have developed some important insights and methodological perspectives, but these have been generally informed by individualistic, competitive, and reductionist perspectives. So on the one hand, and on the other hand, during this long period of exploration and conquest, these knowledge production systems have developed a number of biases and perspectives about the societies that they encountered. And these have also been built into the prior system of individualism, individual, competitive, and reductionist perspectives. So you have a fusion of these these approaches. Now, that would not be a problem, or rather it would just be a problem for European knowledge production systems. But given the history of domination, what has happened is that the results of this knowledge production system have become embedded in European knowledge and have now been imposed on the rest of the world through schooling. Schooling at both ends, both in terms of the European ruling class that was schooled in this knowledge, but also those who were colonized have been schooled in this knowledge and who end up seeing the world through eyes that are different, in fact, from their own. And the implication of this for knowledge globally is that the systems and structures of knowledge production around the world have been modeled on the principles and perspectives developed and practiced by the leading institutions of Europe. More often, they have been intimately connected with empire, as we know from the various this and that must fall campaigns that have been launched around the world, in South Africa, in Europe, and elsewhere. And that although the principles and perspectives have been challenged, both within and outside empire, they remain largely intact and in place. So they remain largely the dominant perspective and view on the world. And that therefore, sorry?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. And that therefore these principles continue to shape and influence knowledge production around the world. So if we want to change this, we're going to need to do 3 basic things. One, we need to get knowledge production systems to lose their Eurocentric bias, to develop an analytical framework away from what we're calling analytical reductionism and methodological individualism towards holism, systems and network analysis, and also focus on cooperative rather than just competitive ways of looking at things. So I'm going to just finish up by talking a little bit about what we did. We developed a questionnaire to look at scholars, scholarship, methodological approaches, analytical techniques, and assessment forms. And we asked everybody in the business department to fill out this questionnaire. We talked about how diverse are their scholars who they have in their handbooks, how diverse is the scholarship, because we know that the two are not the same, and looking at people from different parts of the world, previously part of empire, the analytical perspectives, the historical narratives, and also the holistic and system-based perspectives. So we looked at all of those things, diversity of scholarship, looked at diversity of methodological approaches and analytical techniques, to try to see if, to what extent members of staff were teaching a mixture of methodological and approaches and analytical techniques, to what extent the classroom was being used as a learning community, as we've just heard from Macme, for example, and to what extent students were allowed to develop their own knowledge. We looked at assessment forms. So, what form do assessments take? What novel ways are people trying to develop their means of assessment? And we've just set this out. We're taking the results, and what we're going to do when we have the results and analyze them is to give them back to members of the department so that we can collectively evaluate what our current practice is. It's an opportunity for people to learn from one another because this is something that we don't do very well. Many of us, for example, will not be very familiar with what Macme and Gabriella did in the team-based learning. So what we've asked people to do is to comment on and give examples of their practice. And we can then see what others are doing and then decide as a group how we want to take this forward. And it'll be an ongoing thing, hopefully, that will take us further and further down the road of deepening, the alternative perspectives that we offer to students within the field of economics study at Greenwich. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Adolte. Got a couple of questions. We'll start with Macme. Adolte, if you can unshare the screen, that would be helpful.
Sure, okay.
Macme, I know that you do a lot of data work, and one of the questions that's come in on the is around the ethnicity data and where you got that data from. Can you give us a sense of where you got the data from and how much work it takes to do what you're doing? That's it?
Oh, yeah. We got the data from the university, from how their students are registered, whether they are classified as ethnic minority or whatever. We didn't have any fluid gender issue. So male and female was clear cut, because sometimes there is the issue of transgender and things like that. We didn't have that problem. But with regard to the ethnicity, was whatever is they are classified as officially in university's record.
Yeah, and the work that Gabriella and Macme led in our department is really informing the development of a centre we're calling Merit, which will lead with many colleagues at Greenwich, including Macme and Tessa and Gabriella. And the university has an enormous amount of data, actually, held on the systems that we underuse. And in education literature in the main, you do a lot of institutional studies, but we don't do those so much in economics. And it's been really lovely to talk to other people through RES about how we might use that data in the future. So we're lucky at Greenwich to have a really beautiful set of data, and we're able to engage with that data. And we're starting with merit and using that to evaluate various things at the university, building on the work that Makame and Gabriella did. Adolte, just one question for you. We have a very strong pluralistic heritage at Greenwich. Does that help when trying to have these conversations about decolonizing, or in your experience?
In the discussion that we had, we only had one sort of dissenting voice, and to be fair, the dissent was not so much on the part where I talked about evaluating the past and understanding the present. It was more on whether we actually needed to have an active engagement in the process of trying to decolonize our teaching. So that was where the dissent was, and there was only one voice that raised it. So I suppose I can surmise from that there wasn't a lot of resistance to the idea. However, I do need to say that the response to the questionnaire was not as good as it should be, and that might be interpreted as a kind of passive but nevertheless non-cooperative response to the initiative.
Thanks, Adolte. Well, Steffi puts up her slides or whatever she'd like to do next. So just to give her a flash, there's a comment around the ethical loops. In fact, we did quite a lot of work on the ethics side to get access to the data for the sorts of analysis that we're doing. And so now what we have as a department is we lead on evaluation for the university around the access and participation plan. And as part of that, we've built in an institutional level approval, because this is all secondary data. But just a couple of highlights in terms of the ethical loops. It did involve talking to the chair of the ethics committee and, agreeing that institutional sign off. And then we lodge with them each project that we do, rather than needing to do the ethics approval, because it is essentially administrative secondary data. The only other thing to think about is obviously you can't use data before an exam board. So any analysis has to be done after the students have been through an exam board and those grades are approved. So we can only look at the grades after an exam board, and we can only report analysis where cell sizes are bigger than 10, which is an agreement that we've used to copy the ONS measures in that space. So there's a couple of kind of loops, yes, but having had those discussions with the chair of the ethics committee, we've got kind of a block ethics approval, and we lodge projects as we do them. Steffi, over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you. Just let me say thank you very much to all of you. Thank you, Denise, for inviting me. It has been so insightful to hear your experiences, your research, and what you are doing. And I really look forward to follow up this conversation. So I prepared here a few slides about what is diversity in learning and teaching more in general. And I hope to be able to link some of these to the discussion that I have just heard. Hopefully. So something that I would like to mention here is that this year, perhaps more than ever, we are talking quite a lot about teaching. So even for Farida, as I say, I love teaching. Teaching is a beautiful career, and I honestly have got so much out of it. So I really hope that you don't get like lost, or you get all the mentorship that you need if you want to follow this career. But this year has been very challenging, and of course, I'm talking to the right crowd. I guess we all know why this year has been very challenging. There is the problems with technology, with the level of workloads for students, the level of workload for staff, how to maintain engagement with students. the inequalities, and of course the fact that you are, most of you are teaching in Greenwich, you can talk more about inequalities perhaps than many of us. The inequalities among students, some students have better access to resources than others. And of course there is the problem of assessments that Macame talked about. But I think this is also a great opportunity to not just think about teaching during a pandemic, but to sit down and I think have a conversation that we haven't had about teaching perhaps a long time, or some of us are having, but it's not something more institutional. And that a lot of the challenges that we saw during the pandemic are also challenges to create more inclusive teaching. We can use technology can be our friends in order to become more inclusive. Of course, we need to consider the inequalities that technology might create, the workloads, how we engage with the students. But perhaps, and I think something that I find very fascinating, what Gabriela and Macme are doing in this course is like changing assessments in a way. I think economics tends to be very traditional, or at least in many of our courses, we are very traditional. We use essays, we use a very heavy weighted final exam, and that's it. So if we want to create more inclusive teaching and learning for our students, we need to move away from that style of assessments. Of course, I'm not gonna have only 10 minutes, so I just wanted to put some ideas in your mind, some of the things that perhaps some of us are discussing, but it's good that it was mentioned because assessments is a crucial part of why we observe the gaps, the wording gaps that we observe at the moment between the different demographic groups, whether this is for ethnicity, for gender, or other things. So it's good that we see something on assessments. One thing, I didn't focus too much on diversity on staff. Which is very important. And so I'm very glad that Farida and Defa talk about this at the beginning. But something that perhaps I wanted you to consider about is that at least for many of us, we are trying to attract more diversity into economics. Well, of course, at Greenwich, you just explained you have the diversity, but Farida made a very good point there. And she said, it's not enough to attract me to the university. You need to show that you care about me. You need to show that I belong here. And I think that is a very important thing, and it's something that came out in January 2020. I organized the Women's in Economics student workshop. Of course, it was a lot focused on gender, but we have a conversation with these students coming from around 12 universities in the UK, and it's something that came out. So after the workshop, we wrote a quick guide, and we put together 7 action points in order to make economic more inclusive. Of course, a lot of this is focused on gender because that was the topic of the conference, but I think it's something that we can think a bit more broader. The first 3 points, and I'm not going to spend time on this because I think at this point, especially to the crowd that we are talking today, is quite obvious. So, sorry, I think there is a mistake in the slide. But the first 3 points should be into reshape the image of economics, a curriculum that reflects what economists really do, and be more proactive with role models. And I think that all resonates to some of the things that we have said here. Economics is not just about, if we look at economists, this is a typical picture that we get. And of course, you can see that they're striking, are all male, mostly white, from one specific country, or very few countries from one specific area of the world. That's not economics. That doesn't reflect, at least what I have seen today, doesn't reflect all of us, and we can do better for our students. It's not just about finance, it's not just about money. Economics is much more than that. And I think that's something that we should explain to students. But perhaps something that I would like to focus a little bit more is in these 3 other points, and that they matter because, as I said, once we attract diversity, we need to make sure that we are also inclusive. And the two things are not, and perhaps if you were at the session yesterday, of course, you hear me talking about this already, but it is not just about bringing more diversity, but then we have to become inclusive. We have to change the culture in a way. And from students' ideas, we came with three of these points, thinking about what are the important aspects for students. And some of the things was, for instance, students, the academic activities are very important, and we talk about those in point 5 and 6, but point 4 was what else matters for the student experience. And it's not just the academic, but it's also the non-academic activities. What else the students do during their time at university, how they socialize. And so we need to make sure that somehow all these activities are inclusive, because that creates parts of the student experience, and that helps to develop sense of belonging on students. In fact, we need to think very carefully how we develop sense of belonging in our students. Because if we are trying to attract diversity, we need to think about how different people with different background, with different experiences are going to feel about the culture of the department of the university they are coming to. And for instance, we have seen that this is very important, because in typically male-dominated disciplines, women have consistently less sense of belonging. So it is something that we do need to work on. An idea that we came out was trying to create a validation strategy. Can read more on the validation strategy in the report, but it's in a way, and I think Farida mentioned about this, sometimes as lecturers, we don't even know who our students are, or, we teach 400, 200 students, and, we see them in the lecture this year, we didn't even see them in many cases, but we don't really know who students are. So of course, it's going to be difficult to get to know students one by one, but it can be important to at least get to know what a student population looks like, what is their background, where they come from. And perhaps with this validation strategy, based on some work done by Cooper in 2009, we can help to create a much more positive culture, but different positive cultures within our universities, which are departments. And in fact, we see that it is important because the students from underrepresented groups within the university do experience lower levels of validation. Validation means how they feel accepted by their teachers, how they feel their experiences are counted, how they feel that they belong to a specific discipline, department, or university. And in fact, lecturers are key contributors to this, to the students' feelings of belonging and motivation. So yes, it's important the non-academic activities, but as lecturers, we can also contribute to that. And finally, the 7th point, of course, as I said, this was very focused on women. And what we found at the workshop, what I didn't expect perhaps, is how free all these girls who participated felt to talk about it. So here on the screen, I just put some of the comments coming out of the workshop that shows how they felt there is need for these spaces to talk about different issues, or just to share about the potential barriers that they face, just to share their similar experiences. Because I don't have too many slides, I'll leave you a couple of seconds to just read through the comments here. And I just stop very briefly on this point 2 in the last comment that I guess reflects quite well what the students were actually telling me, and is there was an intimate atmosphere which was perfect for asking questions. And I said, well, what are we creating? What type of environment we are offering to students if they don't feel they can ask questions, whatever difficult these questions must be? So it's something that we need to rethink about it. And perhaps if we move forward and just think about it's not just for women, but let's create spaces to be able to have these conversations. These conversations can be difficult sometimes. They don't need to be easy. And sometimes we always talk about safe space, but we don't need sometimes safer spaces. We need braver spaces when students can express their concern, their experiences, what they are going through, and they are going to be supported by us and the university community in general. So we do need to provide these spaces for all. If you attended the conference, the session yesterday on diversity, of course, you have seen this slide already, but I think I'm very optimistic, and listening all your interventions, listening all the people that are actually working on this makes me even more optimistic that together we can actually make economics more inclusive. We are working to this, and it was a very interesting questions on data that we have there. It is important that we collect more and better data. One thing on, for instance, we have only male and female data. I have observed that quite a lot, but I'm a bit worried about when we see the gender variable, there is only male and female, because we are aware that there are a lot of different non-binary or other genders amongst our student population. But what I'm worried is that they don't feel confident enough to self-report that. And I think that's something that we also need to talk more about. But as I said, I just really, I'm happy to share more of us, get any questions or just hear from more people, but thank you very much. And thank you all for the great presentations. That was been very nice to hear from you.
Thank you, Steffi. We've just enough time for Sava. So Sava.
Yes, hi. My name is Sara Gorgoni, and I am an associate professor in economics at the University of Greenwich with an interest in economics education. And over the past 3 years, I have been working with Professor Denise Hawkes and colleagues in order to organize a series of monthly departmental sessions called BEE, Business and Economics Education, which started in 2018 and consider various aspects of our practice, such as how we can best engage and support a diverse student population, reduce attainment gaps, and support colleague scholarship in teaching and learning. I would like to spend the next few minutes of this session talking about the contribution that the BE has made to our EDI efforts, such as the ones presented today by my colleagues. The BE monthly sessions bring all our EDI efforts within a coherent and coordinated framework by providing a space to discuss and share experiences about the why, the what, the who, and the how of economics teaching. I'm not going to go in detail on this, but happy to do it if there's time during the questions. But in practice, the BE involves monthly 90 minutes to 2-hour sessions on topics such as decolonizing and greening up the curriculum, such as the one presented by Adote today, innovative pedagogical approaches, such as the one presented by Malcolm and Gabriella, outreach activities. So our colleague, Dr. Edna Solomon, was awarded twice a Discovery Economics grant, for example, and much more. And a very interesting aspect of the BE is its truly inclusive and fully democratic character. And this is important and goes back to what Stephanie said yesterday and today about the need to not just increase diversity, but improve inclusion. And I am also happy to elaborate more on this aspect if there's time later. The BE has also a developmental purpose and aims at creating a space, safe and brave, for experimentation, reflection, and sharing, which is important for a sense of belonging and emotional well-being, especially at challenging times like these, as well as to foster innovation and adaptation at times where change is paramount. So to conclude, I think that having something like the BEE has which brings us together to share ideas, experiences, and efforts within a coherent and coordinated framework around equality, diversity, and inclusion has enabled us to grow significantly in terms of what we do and how we do it. As mentioned by Denise at the start, we believe that our history and experiences allow us to contribute to the discussion about how to improve EDI in higher education, and we look forward in the future to share more of this externally and with you all, and open up the BE externally in a way. And we are currently working on how we can do so effectively. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. We don't have long, and I am obliged to ask everyone if they can just rate the session. I can, so in the function on the side, please let us know how you feel. There are some comments in the chat box that I've not had a chance to get to. I do apologise, but there is one question I do want to ask and give Gabriella, who's, you've heard her name several times, an opportunity to speak before we finish. Gabriella, you've spent a long time at Greenwich and now you're at Sussex. This kind of work is not cost neutral, is it, in terms of time? Can you just give us a bit of an insight into what it takes in terms of staffing and time to do the sorts of things that you and Macme, you and I and others have been doing?
Thank you, Denise. It is an investment, and therefore it is a cycle. It doesn't, these things don't happen in a matter of a month. There is a cycle itself in the academic organization, but that even more so, you need to plan ahead, you need to be trained. So it does require a lot of time. And I was very lucky because Macme and I were able to do it together. I did it this year, Sussex, by myself, and it has been a very, very intense exercise. So I like what Steffi said about validation strategy. So it needs to be recognized that it takes time, it is an effort. Innovation has a cost, it's not neutral, so putting more time. It's a sort of requires a strategic partnership between us, so the teacher, the student, and the managers. So we were lucky that our line managers were very enlightened. So we would receive funds, Denise and Ricardo helped us. But I think that, you know, it's overlooked, that it doesn't really show, it's assumed that you can do it, that you can do it fast, but if you want to make changes, it is an investment, it requires time.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. I'd like to inspire any other heads of department out there to consider the investment. The investment's worth it. It's worth it for our students, it's worth it for our colleagues, and it's worth it, most importantly, for the discipline economics that we're all very passionate about, as you can imagine. And that was a whistle-stop tour of the lovely team at Greenwich. And thank you so much, Steffi, for being our discussant. We're very grateful. But we will be doing more of these kinds of things as we get dealt up and running, as Sarah alluded to. And we do look forward to the rest of the conference at RES, and any opportunities that you'd like to reach out. We're at Greenwich and you'll be able to find us. And thank you for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.